Hi, everyone. Before we get started, we're gonna go ahead and pull up our presentation. All right, and I'd like to mention that we do have captions available. So if we could go to the next slide, thank you. So live captions are available. So if you have that feature enabled on your Zoom account, you can go to the bottom of the Zoom window and look for the live captions button and then choose enable auto transcriptions, and those captions should pop up. Next slide. So welcome. Hi, everybody. I am Beth Caruso, and welcome to the Diversity in Gaming panel. Today, we have a great panel of industry professionals ready to talk about diversifying gameplay and creation. The panel is brought to you today as a part of a project through UNC Charlotte's Chancellor's Diversity Challenge Fund, and it was developed as a collaboration with 3 librarians with Atkins Libraries Innovation Spaces, or Area 49, Beth Caruso, myself, Tiffany Davis, and Kristen Lamkowski, as well as Julio Bahamon, Director of the Graduate Certificate in Game Design and Development, and Heather D. Freeman, Professor of Art in Digital Media and Art and Art History. The project came about when we realized that Area 49's gaming lab is incredibly popular, but the games and accessories in the collection didn't reflect our commitment to diversity and inclusion. So we have spent the past year researching and purchasing games that focus on diversity and inclusion so that we can address issues in positive representation of women, people of color, people from non-Anglophone nations, those with disabilities, those whose gender or sexual identities are non-majority, and those from underprivileged economic classes. We have also researched accessible controllers that can make games easier to play for everybody, especially people with physical differences. At the close of the panel, Tiffany is going to give you more information on our game survey, and this is how you can help us decide which game candidates should go into Area 49's new diversity in gaming collection, and also suggest more for us to look into. Before getting started, we would first like to acknowledge the original inhabitants of the land where our university resides. UNC Charlotte is located on the traditional homelands of 5 different Native groups, including the Catawba, Shura, Sugary, Watery, and Waxhaw peoples. The city of Charlotte has a Native community that has thrived here for over 50 years, including members of all of North Carolina's 8 state and federally recognized tribes. We know our panelists and some of our participants may be joining us from other areas of the country and even the world. So if you haven't already, we encourage you to learn about the Indigenous people whose lands your home, school, or work is located on. So next slide, please. This is just a quick bit of housekeeping information. So we're going to begin today with an introduction of the panelists and their work, and then we're going to jump into some questions that we have prepared. So a lot of our students from UNC Charlotte have submitted questions ahead of time, and we've combined some that had similar themes. So our participants may recognize some of their questions, and thank you to everybody who submitted questions. If you have questions for our panelists today, just go ahead and type them into the Q&A, and we'll move on to those in the later portion of the panel. Also later, so we are recording this session, and it's going to be available on our Diversity in Gaming LibGuide at the bit.ly link here or the QR code on the screen. Or if you're unable to see those links on the screen, it's bit.ly/diversityingaming. That LibGuide, it doesn't just house all of the games and controllers that we hope that it will make it into our collection, but also a link to the survey that Tiffany's going to talk about later. So now I will go ahead and hand it over to Heather, who will introduce our panelists.
So we want to focus time on the panelists being able to introduce themselves and their own research and work because it's so broad and just fascinating. So just a quick introduction. Mark Bartlett is founder and executive director of the Ablegamers charity, through which he champions for the rights and inclusion of people with disabilities in the video game space as a tool to combat social isolation. And although Eve Crevichet wasn't able to join us tonight, she's been executive director of Take This since 2018, which is a nonprofit working to decrease stigma and increase support for mental health in games. Eve's colleague, Dr. Kelly Dunlop, has kindly stepped in for this evening's discussion, and Kelly is community manager for Take This and a clinical psychologist and game designer. Atya Newman and Mark Reich are professors in the School of Film and Animation at RIT and are developing the Character Mosaic project, through which they hope to address the dearth of minority characters in animation by providing free and appropriate representations of different cultures. Tara Mustafa is an award-winning seasoned game designer and producer and founded Code Coven in 2019 with the aim of making careers in the game industry achievable and nurturing for marginalized communities. Code Coven has been recognized for their work by the Game Awards, Future Class, Women in Games Global Awards, and MCV Develop Awards. And finally, Latoya Peterson is best known for her award-winning blog, racialicious.com, which explores the intersections of race and pop culture. Known for bringing a hip-hop feminist and racial justice framework to technology and cultural analysis, Latoya's perspectives have been widely published, and she was named one of Forbes magazine's 30 under 30 rising stars in media. Among many other roles, Latoya is co-founder and CXO of Glow Up Games, a game studio working on their first title set in the world of HBO's show Insecure. So we're gonna do the self-introductions in the order of this slide, just so we can, so you guys know too. So Atya and Mark are gonna go first. Every panelist has 3 minutes. And since Atya and Mark are presenting together, they're getting 6 minutes. So Atya and Mark.
Yeah, lucky us. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. We're so happy to be able to come and present the Character Mosaic project to you because it's a project that is very near and dear to both of our hearts. So if you've never heard of it, it's not surprising because it's sort of been in development for quite a while, but we haven't brought it up to very much beyond our school level yet. But the way the Character Mosaic project was started, could we go to the next slide, please? Was we wanted to address a dearth of diverse characters that we noticed existed in the just animation medium in general. And this, of course, addressed games and cartoons and animated series. In every form, we found that there was a sort of a huge lack of diversity. And as 3D artists ourselves, we decided that, could you move to the, sorry, next slide. So this over here is our first round of character lineup. I'll explain more about the project as we go, just so you understand. We've done quite a lot of research on how to find or whether there are enough diverse characters. And this, as you can see, is sort of like our visual lineup of our first round of the Character Mosaic project. In the next slide, this Mark and myself are the creators of the project. And we actually, as 3D artists ourselves, have really struggled to help our students find characters that represent themselves. And as a person of color myself, I certainly did understand that struggle from a very personal point of view. So as 3D artists, we decided that we wanted to make pre-rigs or royalty-free rigs that could actually address this particular niche need that is more growing as we go. We launched the project in 2017. We made it a character design competition for our students because we wanted them to have a voice in how they represented both themselves and other nations and how they saw themselves. Also, we opened it up to a lot of people and tried to make sure that when the results came in, when the submissions came in, that we were able to like get educated people to look at the designs and really explore the nuance of what it is to represent another culture or another race or just someone other than yourselves in animation generally. These were the jurors that we brought together. They are all stellar actors in their fields as well, and are very well versed in their studies. And they were able to give us a lot of guidance, which is why we were able to come back to those 8 characters that we showed. And in the next phase, I'm going to let Mark start talking here.
Yeah, so in the next phase, we have two characters currently modeled. We have one character that is fully rigged. The other one is currently in the process of being rigged. But we were able to get students to model and design. They came up with the designs, but then they're also doing the modeling and rigging. So we're kind of facilitating this whole thing moving ahead. Yeah, we have two prototypes. We just finished with our first rig, Emerald, and she is, we have her in the Unreal Engine at the next slide. Yeah. So this is one of my first tests of getting her in the Unreal Engine. So have a little hand issue that we're going to be dealing with, but it is working. And then in the next slide, it'll show the other character, Omar, and he is we're looking at finding a student to rig him, currently in the process. When we started this whole process, it was we had students in our animation classes that were asking for diverse characters, and I would say, okay, well, let's find some, and you go out into the and do a search, and there were two out of hundreds of white males or robots or things like that. So thank you for your time.
Thanks. Next is Kelly Dunlop.
Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Kelly Dunlap. I am the community manager for Take This, but my full-time occupation is I'm a licensed and practicing clinical psychologist, and I also have a background in game design and teach game design at the grad level at American University. And I'm excited to talk to you guys about Take This. Next slide. So Take This was founded in 2012, and it was the first mental health nonprofit of its kind, specifically because it focuses on the games industry. And the mission of Take This is to decrease stigma and increase support for mental health in the game enthusiasts, so our game players, as well as inside the game industry itself with the people who are actually making games. We function on three core pillars. The first is support. So we want to be able to enhance education and share training opportunities in terms of mental health awareness for game players and developers. So a lot of this time, this takes on the role of teaching, reach out. So the Game Developers Conference, for one, we've had a lot of success there talking about things like beating burnout in your studio and depression proofing your studio. That's Dr. B on that top slide there, who is absolutely wonderful, has become quite the guru on burnout. We've published white papers on the state of mental health in the games industry and continue to work with organizations like the IGDA to enhance and give developers access to this kind of material, as well as to support our broader community, which brings us to our next pillar. So community, in clinical psychology and therapy in general, we have this idea of you meet people where they're at. You don't ask them to come to you, you meet where they're already hanging out and engage with them there. And so we work with our community through a couple different methods, one of which is through our online engagement. We know from mental health research that feeling connected and supported is an important piece of preventative mental health care. And we use our community programs to provide spaces for our communities to develop. So for example, our Twitch channel or our Discord are different spaces where people can come together as community. We also highlight and support others in the gaming and streaming community who share Take This's goals, and they use their platforms to destigmatize and educate around mental illness. And these individuals we call our Take This streaming ambassadors. And you can see some of their lovely faces a couple slides back. Offline, Take This has a program for creating safe and quiet spaces, and we call them AFK rooms. We do these at conventions like E3 and PAX, and these are all staffed by trained volunteers as well as mental health professionals like myself, just so people have a space to get away. And the last little bit there is just wellness. Obviously, we care very much about the wellness of people in our communities. And we want to make sure that mental illness is something that gets destigmatized, awareness is raised, and education are prevalent, but that's just the beginning. So we work with organizations like Twitch and the online harassment, games and online harassment hotline to bring resources regarding wellness to game players and developers. And that is hopefully right at 3 minutes.
Yeah,
It's fast.
sorry, but it's a weird process having the auto timer on it. So I apologize for that, but that was
no
great.
worries. Thank you so much.
Thanks. So next we have Mark Bartlett.
Hi, I'm hoping that I'm live because the slides seem to have been like a little bit different for me, but my name is Mark Barley. I am the founder and executive director of the Ablegamers charity. I'm also on the board of GamerX, which is an LGBT plus organization that advocates on behalf of there. And I'm really happy to be here. And I actually know many people on the panel here, but I hope to know some that I don't more soon. Ablegamers was founded in 2004. I am a person with disabilities. I'm a service disabled veteran, but my disability largely did not affect the way I played video games. The catalyst for me creating the organization is my best friend from the 6th grade. In the early 2000s, she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and it started taking away her ability to play video games. We started looking for solutions for her, and we really found none. And so, our mission was born right then to really, create this space. So what is Ablegamers' mission? Well, our mission is to enable play in order to combat social isolation, foster inclusive communities to improve the lives of people with disabilities. We've all been really challenged through this pandemic. And I have to really say that for so many profoundly disabled people, 2020 looked just like 2018, looked just like 2015. Social isolation is an ongoing epidemic among people with disabilities. And our mission is that we know a really well-crafted video game and a good internet connection allows a person with disabilities to connect and really make meaningful friendships in the world. How we do that really at a high level is just like my friend over at Take This, we work through our pillars. We have our peer counseling pillar, which actually works one-on-one with people with disabilities to craft solutions that get them into the game. They're partnered with our engineering pillar, where we create customized products. We have 2 patents under our belt, open source projects. From there, because a lot of my peer counseling deals with physical disabilities, but I want to work with all disabilities, we have our user research group. User research is really studying players with disabilities and really getting their feedback into the larger gaming space. And our professional development pillar, which, as I always say, I can create a custom controller for a person with a physical disability, but I need to talk to a developer to make sure that closed captionings are put into a game. So with that, one of the last things I want to say is for anyone out there that is in the game creation world, please check out accessible.games. We did a huge user research project and came out with something called APX, Accessible Player Experience, 24 design patterns that help you craft solutions to make your games accessible. We have a certification program around that as well, which has been taken by Blizzard, Activision, Square Enix, and many, many more major game companies. So I look forward to joining you guys.
Thanks so much. I'm really excited about this discussion. So next we have Latoya Peterson.
All right, hello everyone. Thank you. So I'm Latoya Peterson. I'm the co-founder and CXO of Glow Up Games, which we describe as building diverse stories to unlock the largest hidden market within video games. So just to get started and talk a little bit about me, I actually could describe my career as games adjacent. And so, I didn't actually start out in the games industry. I've been playing since I was 6 years old and just kind of really loved games. But generally, I was a media executive, and that was before my good friend, Dr. Mittu Kandekar, who's also my co-founder and CEO, asked that we would kind of combine forces and look at how we could change the games industry from kind of the inside by actually working in it. And so we assembled this awesome team. Oh, it's a little bit out of order, it looks like, on these slides. That's okay.
Let me know if you need me to jump to a different one. So
no worries, no worries. So there's actually supposed to be a different slide in the front. So that was a little bit more about my career than this. And then Yeah, no worries. Don't worry about it. So before this, I was a games critic a very, very long time ago, like 2008, 2009. Like I said, I worked in newsrooms before this, so I was on Al Jazeera's The Stream, did quite a bit of work. My most recent gig was at ESPN and Disney, and then I also did some work in AI and ML as well. So Mittu and I had quite a bit to talk about, but we just realized that I was working in entertainment, she was working in games, and that a lot of these things just were not changing. A lot of things weren't shifting the way we saw it in Hollywood. So we started Globe Games because women of color love gaming, but there isn't content geared toward them in the $77 billion mobile games market. Part of that is because the games industry does not actually collect data on women of color and our play practices. So it's very hard to prove that we're playing at all, much less how much we're spending. And so we've gone through this long process of trying to figure out, like, how do you even quantify something? So in the games industry, like, money really talks. And when they talk about who is the core user or figuring out who they create games for, they look at who they have the most data around. And with women, and particularly women of color, even though there's much more data about women than there is of women of color, they generally just don't see us as a market. So we decided to create Glow Up as a platform that will connect eventually diverse audience and diverse players with a diverse ecosystem of games. And we're starting with our first mobile free-to-play game. So we very quickly found a partnership with HBO's Insecure, which is the show created by Issa Rae. And so we created a unique wraparound mechanic, used some stills from the game. That's the full cast and some of the texting to have a combination kind of rap battle / life sim that you're doing in Los Angeles. And we want it to be really rooted in Black storytelling to help also elevate the careers of kind of creators of color who generally don't see their work adapted into games, and to figure things out. So if you want more information, you can definitely find us at Glow Up Games on Twitter, on Instagram, and we're also very easy to find on the web.
Thanks so much. That was awesome. And last but not least, we have Tara Mustafa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Yeah, hi, everyone. My name is Tara Mustafa, and my pronouns are she, her. And I'm the CEO and founder of Code Coven, the first global games industry accelerator for underrepresented talent. I've been a game designer for over 16 years, and I have a passion for games because of the powerful storytelling potential. So I founded Code Coven in 2019 with a mission to move the needle and change the systems in place that aren't allowing for diversity at all levels within the games industry. I saw an inspiring team who share the same values. So in this slide, you'll see this is the Code Coven team I'm very proud of. All of us are underrepresented game developers with diverse experience across the industry, from indie to AAA blockbusters. So our team decided that we needed to take a three-pronged approach to create an all-encompassing career program with heart-based training in mind. And we called it, of course, the Triforce. And the first part of that is our academy. So through our academy, we offer online courses in an intimate 13-person environment, and it gives personal attention and adapts to meet students' needs. No two courses are exactly alike. These are a few of our alumni and their games, and as we all know, representation matters. Secondly, we also launched 2 paid accelerators. The summer program, which was an incubator-style internship for university students and recent graduates whose career opportunities had been cancelled due to the pandemic. And as we can see here, these are a few of the games that our participants made last year. These were games that told diverse stories and actually brought together developers from Wisconsin to Jamaica to South Africa who would have not had the chance to work together before. And these are teams of people that had never met before. We put them together and they created games from concept to completion, and in order to help them build a robust portfolio piece for them to get their first job in the industry. Through our Elevate 2020 program, we supported established indie studios with progressing their projects to become pitch ready or publishable, and opened doors for them to get the funding that they needed. And lastly, we have our teaching studio. So we partner with studios to create outsourced work agreements so that our students can gain practical experience and be credited for it. So we're trying to change the industry at all levels, and through this approach. In 2020 alone, Code Coven was able to react quickly to the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement, leveraging our experience in remote game development, learning, and paying out over $110,000 in stipends to fund diverse creators, and granted over $25,000 in scholarships for BIPOC developers for our Intro to Game Making course. we directly supported over 100 underrepresented game developers from over 15 countries and built a strong mentor network of over 150 developers globally. We're only just beginning, and in the next few years, we aim to quadruple this and have direct impact on moving the needle. So I'm excited to be a part of this panel here today. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for those wonderful introductions of yourselves and the work that you've been doing. My name is Kristen Lamkowski. I'm one of the librarians on this project, and I'm so happy to have everybody here. We have some prepared questions, as Beth mentioned, that we're going to present to the panelists. And as we go along, if you have questions that you would like to ask, please use the Q&A box that's located at the bottom of your screen to add questions. And I do see that there was a question asked in the chat that has been answered. If someone was wondering what rigging is a bit like the skeleton of an animal. It tells you how to move, etc. Not an animator. Someone else may have a better description. So if any of our panelists want to give a little bit better description to answer that sort of first question from one of our participants, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a really, really good description. It's basically, it's not like a formal like structure in that sense, but it allows us to teach the body how to deform and allows you to actually like, you know, kind of control it and reshape it.
I think she was trying to say that it was moving the geometry around. And that is a complicated process, and that's what we're trying to help solve, is how to let people just move those characters around without having to have them learn how to put a whole process together.
Yes, it's definitely a painful process and often a big sticking block for new young animators.
Thank you so much for helping those of us who don't have as much game design background to understand that. I'm going to go ahead and jump in with one of our prepared questions. Many people from marginalized populations are discouraged from playing games or pursuing careers as game developers due to exclusionary practices, microaggressions, and other circumstances that create hostile workplaces and classrooms. Companies often claim to have diversity among their staff without equitable practices to foster equitable practices to foster an inclusive environment, marginalized populations are not given a chance to succeed. So how can the game industry hold companies accountable for inclusivity and equity as opposed to just diversity? What are game companies and the game community and educational partners doing to reverse this stigma? And do you have any notable examples that the industry, game communities, or educational bodies are doing? And I'll open this up to anybody who would like to answer. There was many parts in there, so if you'd like me to repeat anything, or if you'd like to jump in with any thoughts you have to any of those.
Well, for the purposes of no dead air, that was a very, very complex question. I don't really think I have a good answer to that, because I have been asked many, many times by people in positions of power at major studios, like really silly questions like, so how do we hire more developers with disabilities? And my response is, you on an offer letter and you send it to them, and then you bring the, you know, equipment, or you take the challenges of making sure that the accessible equipment they need to be successful is there. To whoever asked this question, you're right, I don't have a good answer.
Can I jump in on that as well? It is a really tricky question. And I think, I don't know, with my experience with Code Coven, I've noticed that I'm seeing a lot of larger corporations hiring specifically ahead of diversity and inclusion, whose purpose is to solely focus on that one lens. And, you know, typically in my career, I've seen previously that it always had to be done within the studios by the 5 people that really cared about D&I, who are usually the people who are suffering from these microaggressions, who had to be able to move the needle and champion these causes internally. So I think it's exciting to see that kind of change and progress, but these people are the people who need to be held accountable and help being given, in a way, what's a better term, ammo or evidence that these initiatives are having an effect. I think one thing that you touched on, Mark, and Kelly mentioned earlier is about, I hear companies going, well, we put out a job posting, for example, and we didn't get as many diverse hires. And it's just like, the one thing I've said was, did you go to the spaces where the people are?
Mhm.
And it's like you said, make the offer, headhunt, actively try and bring those people in. I'll get off my soapbox now.
Is it okay if I jump in? I was actually going to say, like, you're absolutely right. I think I think that it's kind of amazing that we had this moment in 2020 where, sort of, probably because of the pandemic, everyone was sort of still enough to realize collectively that there was like this global problem of diversity. I think for the longest time, it's been something which, as Tara mentioned, like, only the 5 people who were suffering were kind of the ones who were like beating that drum. And now we're finally in a position where more than just those 5 people in that company have noticed, I think it's both a good thing that people are taking note, and it's also a little bit dangerous for it to turn into something where it becomes like a requirement of accountability. Because if we make it too much about like getting that like just checkbox, then it will turn into a checkbox. And I think true change will come from like an actual adjustment of values, rather than of a requirement of like hitting these number of like hires and these numbers of people of color and all of those things.
I think the point that was made about going to where those groups are, and Latoya, jump in here. I just think that's a really good point, because from a disability perspective, is the tool that you're using to find those people even an accessible tool? So you may have created a barrier just based on where you posted that job. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, no worries. To build on the TS point too, like, it's really important to notice too the difference between kind of like what somebody does for publicity and what they're actually doing at their studio. So I gave a talk last night at NYU, and we looked at like the Black Lives Matter statements that came out from all these different game studios, many who didn't even bother to make one. So let's like put that in a separate category. But other folks who did, a lot of these things were very like just diffuse. Like, we're going to give some money to some companies, normally like the NAACP or Black Lives Matter, but not actually look at like the realm that they control, which is game development or game design. A lot of those donations didn't go to places like Blacks in Gaming, didn't go to places like Latinx in Gaming, didn't go to game developers of color. And so, and then even like, a few years on, like a few months on, a lot of that money actually wasn't distributed. So there's a lot of gaps in accountability. And quite a few places actually don't see diversity as part of a core profit motive or part of like core how you ship a product. So it's very much a nice to have, which easily falls off the table when you're looking at kind of like dollars and cents. And that's if they even care at all. There are a lot of studios that, we found through both, our friends' testimony and then also like just trying to build Glow Up Games that are actively hostile to diversity. They don't actually care. They don't feel like it's something that they need to take seriously. And so it depends on the studio culture, but a lot of studio cultures don't want to change because they feel like things are working fine the way that they are.
Just to add to Latoya's point about like the dollars and cents, one of the very unique things about mental health and neurodivergence as a diversity factor is that the game developer space actually has a higher percentage of neurodivergence than the general population, which is, it's really fascinating to see how people are attracted to these different careers. And so one of the things that Take This has done has worked with a lot of game developers around, like, it makes sense for you, considering a large amount of your workforce maybe has ADHD, maybe is on the spectrum. In game development, they've probably experienced depression or intense anxiety at some point, let's be honest. So, but like replacing somebody and training someone new is incredibly, incredibly expensive. So one of the things that we did in our 2018 State of the Industry report was try and put like dollars and cents to like, if you let the churn happen, like this is the cost of bringing on a whole new cast of people. Whereas if you can retain people where they're not crunching, they're not burning out, they do feel like their voices are heard, their unique accommodations are actually accommodated. Look at the dollars and how it balances, which it feels a little squishy because I'm like, this is an altruistic thing and you should just want to do it. But like, here's a nice chart with dollar signs on it to help you too. So we're seeing, at least in the mental health space, a little bit of shift, a little bit more openness, but that's just such a small slice of diversity. That's unique.
And I'll speak to the white people that are out there. You need to, if you see it, you need to stick up for people who don't have that voice. So if you see those microaggressions, which it's generally a form of racism, you need to stand up and not be afraid to make people uncomfortable. And you may be uncomfortable yourself, but it's not going to change unless somebody is there to help make the change and to call people out on it. So don't be afraid to be uncomfortable. That's part of your job.
And just to come back a little bit to something that Tara and Mark said as well, about going to the spaces where people are to hire them. Another place where companies can really look is just how those diverse applicants are evaluated as well. So many times, and there are so many studies about how like men and women, like just having like a funny sounding name or a male sounding name versus a female sounding name can actually work against you in hiring. But then, to do something where you sort of make the extra effort, go to that space and then turn them down because, quote, they weren't qualified, really, like so much of like everything that we have to address has to do with each company sort of taking stock of their own mindset, because this is one of those things which, again, I know I'm reiterating at this point, but you can turn it into a checkbox, but if somebody doesn't really want to be diverse, then they're not going to be, and it doesn't matter how many checkbox and rules and laws that we make. I didn't mean to be very depressing about that.
No, you all have
stopped. I know.
You all have made such excellent points. Mark, Reich, did you want to add something?
I was just going to say that also when you see opportunities for minorities to lead, or somebody with a disability, to let them lead and support them, and be supportive and not try to I don't know, make things go off the rails. So it will also make a much better work experience.
And you all spoke really eloquently to ways that we can address these issues in the companies that exist that are making the games, the game designers. We have a follow-up question about how can workers in higher ed best contribute to the goals of more diversity and inclusion in gaming? Some of us don't work in games directly, but have research interests in gaming or work with students who are pursuing game careers. So how do we work with those individuals, those students, and promote this?
I mean, I can jump in on that one. So I teach grad students, and I teach games history and society, the psychology of video games, and games research methods. And even in my games research methods class, my students get a full 3 to 5 hour lecture over 2 days about ethics. Like, this is how you ethically design something. And, given my background in mental health, it is specifically mental health related. But, if you're in a university setting, it's, you are literally helping the next gen of game developer come up. And so if you have these perspectives or these experiences or these unique lenses into game design, like, put them in there. The last class I taught just earlier this week, it was about the neuropsychology of UX. So I'm not a UX designer at all, but I can tell you that because of neuropsychology, I know that bold things gets attention. I know that orange and blue are really great options if you're trying to be mindful of people with color blindness. You want to have options around turning off rumble, because for some people, it's really hard to process the sensory. And so again, I'm not, this is a very small niche that I have as a clinical oriented person, but I bring that into my classes, even if it doesn't seem like it fits, like games research methods. Too bad, you're learning about neuropsychology and ethics. Those are important things. So don't be afraid to bring your flair in. And my class knows, like, no one goes through a single one of my classes without learning about consent and like what consent in games looks like. It does not matter the topic. If you're with me, you're gonna hear about it.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things we're working to do when Black Lives Matter, and we have a training program, a certification program, that there is a cost barrier to it. And we created the DPAD program. One of my team members, Greg Haynes, pitched this, and where we created scholarships where we were actually targeting people of color, LGBT, Latinx, disabled game developers, because we were seeing within the industry this certification that we were creating was something game companies were actually looking for in their new hires. And so, giving these $2,000 scholarships so that we could give that real resume market differentiator in that resume to make sure that we're creating that diverse game organization that we want. And in fact, Greg even reached out to me and said, hey, Mark, make sure we talk to Latoya next week.
Oh, cool. Feel free. I think on that note, I'm not an academic. I didn't do any of those types of things, but quite a few of my friends are, including Dr. Candaker. But one of the things that I've noticed, there's huge gaps just from the critic side and from writing about games for so many years. There's huge gaps in the types of research that's being done, particularly around certain segments in population. So I'm a huge fan of Betsy DeSalvo's work. She now is, I think, an assistant professor at Georgia Tech. I'm an assistant professor. She's a full professor, I think assistant director now. Yes, at Georgia Tech. I met her when she was doing her PhD program, and her PhD was this project called Glitch Game Testers, which was around basically why more African-American boys don't go into computer science. And so we had a really robust conversation. She was like, oh, you're like a living part of my research. Let's keep talking. So for 10 years, we kept talking to each other about some of these assumptions. And I'd be like, well, some of these things are more of a class thing and not a race thing. But I loved how she broke down like this idea of play practices and how things could be different and how computer science environments were turning people off very early on from these kind of game design careers. They were switching out like year 1, year 2. And so the only folks who were making it through the pipeline were a certain, were just kind of like of a certain type. And she kind of really broke that down beautifully by like even people like in terms of, was the computer in your home a family machine, or was it a, a private machine that you could just use? And for particularly like young white males and young Asian males, it was a private machine. For African-American and Latinx people, it was definitely more public. But I've never seen more research like that. And so Betsy finished her PhD. She ended up partnering with Morehouse to, put that cohort into essentially more design programs. Some of them did go on into computer science. And so it was a really interesting outcome, but it's only happened once. And she only looked at like a cohort of essentially 30 boys in Georgia. There's no information on girls that's equivalent. There's nothing that's quite like that. There's also like that really awesome MIT book series, Beyond Barbie and Mortal Kombat, that they've done various different versions on and different things. But again, like those gaps between like years that someone is actually doing that research. So Ho Lin Lin is this amazing researcher that followed a cohort of girl gamers in Taiwan and looked at like the casual discouragement of girls as players from age 9 to like 21. But again, these are like very few and far between. And, as they age, it gets harder and harder to be able to come back and refer to those studies. So like, I think there's a lot of gaps in research that people can start looking at, and particularly building on the work of folks who came before to look at how does this update now in the esports era, now when so many more people are streamers, how do these things change?
I would also say to look at your curriculum and see, what kind of images are you showing when you're teaching? Is the entire lesson, mostly white people that are being shown, or is it a diverse population? I teach animation, and I try to specifically diversify the images that I'm showing to help other students in the audience that can see themselves in these films, and then also encouraging students to make films about their culture and about their experiences. If I have a modeling, advanced modeling class, and it's currently made up of 90% Asian population, and all women, actually, just thinking about it now. But one of the projects that they had was to make a bust of a character, and all of them picked, or it was a famous person, and all of them picked a white woman for the person that they've, that they were going to model. And it's great that they have women that they're modeling. That's a good start. But it took a little bit of prodding to be like, this is what you guys need to do. And representation starts at home. So you can make these changes, and that's what's going to help bring about change.
Just to add on to that point as well about those traditions, one thing that I've noticed with our talks with higher education institutions was looking at other ways that games technology can be used in a broader sense, whether it's talking to like the theater department where they've got grants available to create an immersive experience using game technology and game developers, but particularly allotting some of that grant towards developers who are from First Nations backgrounds or who are marginalized in some ways. There's other tangible ways of helping diversify that, I think, core pool of developers, is looking at those angles. And I know there's some fascinating work being done with, like, a friend of mine working on VR software for veterinarians and surgeons to be able to do to practice their skills, of course, remotely and not on cadavers, and other amazing things. But I think there's just such a realm that can be explored with games technology and design thinking to broader societal issues that can help raise all ships globally in all things. So.
And that's an excellent point too. And honestly, I think as academics and as professors, even in our varieties of forms, we have sort of like that magical power where we shape not the current time, but the future that is to come. And moments like this are actually very, very pivotal in a sense, because I think one of the biggest obstacles to diversity is lack of awareness more than anything else. So just being able to like bring it up or talk about it, which probably because of how I look, and I English is not a first language for me, so I have moments where I'll like use a phrase wrong, and then my students will have to explain things. Or in my classrooms, there's a lot of back and forth where I'm like, I don't understand why you did that, and then they have to explain it, and then I'm like, why? That's so weird. And then there's a whole conversation, but it kind of gamifies that entire process as well, where they have to learn about me then, because I don't understand them. And I think that's kind of like valuable in a way, because it makes them curious, and I push very hard to get them to be curious about other cultures. And I say, in some cultures, this is like a, complete mortal sin. Did you know that, or red is like a color of celebration, but bringing up like just like little contrasting moments, I think, as you're teaching, even if you're teaching something very innocuous, I think those are sort of like the beginning steps towards a bigger journey. And I think, yes, our children are going to be, they're going to be the ones who make the world change. In fact, I've told a few of my students that I'm going to take away their degrees if they don't make good stuff when they get into the
And she will do it too.
I will.
She'll find a way.
I remember stuff, exactly.
Well, thank you all. We'll move on to another one of our prepared questions that focuses a bit more on accessibility, which we've been touching on already. Video games often require 3 sensory skills: sight, hearing, and touch, but many players are not able to engage all 3 skills. We often hear how developers push accessibility aside, claiming that the game would not be the same with accessible options. Are there processes designers and developers can go through to figure out how to make something more accessible yet still exciting to play, while honoring the original intent and design of the games? And what kinds of accessibility components present particular challenges and are not being considered by most developers?
I guess I'll jump in on this one. That's a lot to unpack. So I will say that the statement that adding accessibility makes the game not what I find that was, I ran into that argument a lot more maybe 6 years ago than I do now. one of the things we did during the introduction is Latoya mentioned about talking about spending and money. And, one of the ways Ablegamers really moved the needle in accessibility was talking about, the buying power, the discretionary income of people with disabilities. In the United States alone, I think the number is somewhere around a whole lot, $46 billion in discretionary income in the United States alone among people with disabilities. And how, adding those accessibility, or 21 billion, Greg just actually, my friend just told me. But when you look at that and, I would go to a game company and say, well, don't you want more money? And the answer was always, yes, I do. Indie developers, and I think what really moved the needle is indie developers used accessibility as a market differentiator, as a way of finding their audience. And then all of a sudden, the big game companies were losing to the indies. So is there ways to do it? Again, Ablegamers, through our research, we had several, published papers. We created something called APX, which is a set of design patterns. They're free right now. You can go out and get them. And what they do is they teach you ways to think about what you're doing. And one of my favorite design patterns that I like to use, because the questioner talked about modalities, is this idea of what we call the second channel. And the second channel pattern really talks about if you're using a primary way of giving an indication in the game. So something I like to say is, let's say there's a level mechanic, and when you level, there's this like beautiful particle that skirts around you or something like that. That's a visual channel that you used. But you can also add a sound that goes with it, a second channel, so that if my primary way of taking in information is visual, I've got that cue. But if my primary way of taking in information is potentially auditory, I've been given that cue as well, or using haptic or using any of those other. But really, when we teach this and we talk about that, the outcome of it, which is fascinating as we've trained developers, is because there's this shared language, if me and a game developer showing me something and I'm in a position and I'm like, that's really great, I like what we've done there, but we have a second channel problem. Because we have that shared language and we both know what second channel means, by simply saying we have a second channel problem, we've actually had a very complex accessibility conversation in a single sentence, because we have that shared language. And we know that second channel is really wanting to make sure that people who primarily look at audio have a visual cue. People that are primary visual have an audio cue. But all I had to say was, hey, other Mark, we have a second channel problem there. You're right. Let's get the audio team to get us a sound cue attached to that. Boom, we've just solved an accessibility problem in a single sentence. So I think to the person who asked this question, I would say that the industry of today is very different than 5 years ago. And your question would be much harder to have answered 5 years ago than today. So that's my piece. I'll yield the floor to my panelists.
Jump in. I think looking for ways to incorporate accessibility into your game as being actually a part of the game rather than just being something that's tacked on. A good example is Moss. So the VR game. Yeah. So for those that might not know, Moss is a VR game where you have a little rabbit quill, and it goes through, and so the animator came up with the idea to instead of having squeaks for a mode of communication to the viewer, which is you helping the mouse or the moss get through or quill get through, he uses or they use sign language to help communicate. So while you're playing the game, you're also learning sign language at the same time, which is a great idea. And I also just recently saw on Reddit was a game called Sushi Ben VR. And what he ended up doing is he used manga panels. So the character would come out, and then there would be these panels that would show up next to the character of specific things that were important to the game that they wanted to draw your attention to. And if you're, especially in VR, you're really at a visual disadvantage because things generally can take place pretty far away. So pulling those panels up help, visually impaired and even not visually impaired, just really see that action. So.
And that's such an important piece too, is that when you are designing for accessibility, you are literally making the game better for everyone. Celeste is probably one of my favorite examples. If there was not like an invincibility mode, I would not be able to play that game. And that game is beautiful. Now that mode was not developed for me in mind, but that's fine because it enhances my enjoyment of it. So I think that's, just even as a game designer, it's going to make your game better. So there's no loss here. In terms of like finding additional support, I know that the team at Xbox has an accessibility lab, and don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure if you are trying to get your game on the Xbox store, you can actually request for it to be submitted through the accessibility lab, and they'll give you feedback on your game and like what you can do to make it better in lines with the accessibility standards that they already know and use in-house. So I'm pretty sure that's a thing, fairly certain, but just
I believe you're right.
5%.
I'll support you that I believe that you're right.
Okay, Mark and I, we're on the team. We're good.
But I just, before you jump to the Susan,
Sure.
Dr. Dunlop, you did say, our model is broken up into access and challenge. Access is really getting that information back and forth. But to your point, when you start looking at the challenge patterns, every person, whether they recognize the fact that they have a disability or not, goes, you know what, I lean heavily into this challenge pattern because games are about challenge. And what's really, games are different in terms of accessibility than almost every other part of accessibility. Amazon wants you to have a barrier-free way of buying a toaster. They don't want to have, you see it, you buy it, you check out, you go. But barriers, challenges are an important part of gaming, which is very unique to gaming versus, banking and accessibility in those spaces. So the ability, when you start looking at patterns around challenge and tuning that challenge, what we have found in the, thousands of people that have, taken APX is we all, whether they identify as having a disability or not, go, you know what, I heavily rely on this challenge pattern. Jump puzzles are terrible for me, so, if you have a jump puzzle, I'm done. I'm stuck in Moss right now because there's a jump puzzle I can't do, and so, to that point, challenge is unique to gaming, but we all lean into it, all of us.
And we had a great follow-up question from one of our listeners today. Is there a metric or a framework by which us leisure gamers can assess accessibility and diversity? I ask because some of us want to reward the good developers.
I can only speak from the accessibility standpoint. I think, again, one of the things that's moved the needle is social media has given people the ability to have a voice that largely couldn't have a voice before. So I know there's, a lot of players with disabilities out there, calling games out who do poorly, but also rewarding games that do it right. Is there a metric? Is there a way of measuring it? No, but if you see an accessibility panel in a game, go explore it. And if you like what you see, use those voices, use those unique ways that we can communicate with companies like we've never been able to do, to give them kudos. Advocate if you don't have a disability, advocate for your friends that might.
Just a really kind of like easy way. On Twitter, I follow an organization called Can I Play That? And it does accessibility reviews. And so, they look for things I would never think to look for. And so it's not like, here's a blueprint and you must match this, but, they take their lived experience and their expertise and they apply it to, popular games that are out there. So that's my shortcut for looking into who's doing the work and who's doing well.
Great. Well, we'll move on to our next question. Recently, companies have released more games featuring diverse protagonists and secondary characters. This includes characters representing more diverse racial and cultural identities, gender identities and sexuality, physical disabilities, and class. When building such characters, how does a game designer approach researching and creating the characters in a way that reflects all aspects of the character's culture in a realistic and positive way? Is a focus on diverse protagonist representation a way to encourage a more diverse development teams and more diverse player communities?
Yeah, this is a fascinating one, because I think if you had asked me this question when I was a critic about 10 years ago, I would have been like, absolutely, like people love seeing reflection in the games and they'll feel like they'll be more motivated to go in the industry. And that's still true to a small extent. But what I learned since coming into the industry in particular is actually how few people are in decision-making positions, kind of behind the curtain on games. And so even though now that there's like diverse protagonists, you're starting to see more and more, what you're getting is kind of like a diverse avatar over whatever the game was supposed to be anyway. It's not actually culturally informed. Normally there's not writers of color on the staff, particularly for race and representation. There might not be women writing for women's roles. I didn't realize that until I read an old guide to narrative design. And in that guide, they were talking about like, how do players connect to characters? And they're like, oh yeah, so Lara Croft is a key example of a character that players cannot relate to because they would normally date her or see her as a sexual object. And I was like, what the hell are they talking about? It doesn't make any sense, right? But it's funny, Mitzi knew exactly who that was. It's some kind of like retired narrative design book. But it's this idea that, again, like who is the core player versus who are you supposed to relate to on screen? And a lot of times it has been men generally penning the stories of people like Lara Croft, right? All the way down. And so you can assume that because there's a little bit more diversity that you saw in front of the camera, that the same thing is happening behind the camera, that there were people in decision-making roles around the game, there are people who are heading up the game, but that generally is not the case. And so it's a way to show more representation and to make your player base feel a lot more included, but it's not necessarily like a silver bullet that's going to lead to more diversity behind the scenes or more people coming into game development. That's a much, much more complicated problem.
I just want to jump in here on Latoya's point. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it before. It's absolutely that needs to happen. The people in positions of power need to be diverse, and that's the absolute last thing that needs to happen. I mean, you even look at in politics with Jacinda Ardern being Prime Minister of New Zealand and then instituting bereavement leave for people who have, experienced miscarriages, things like that. That's what it means to have a diverse person in a position of power, because they are thinking and doing justice to these experiences. And it was really interesting, like for Code Coven, for one of our summer programs, we were talking at this little mini conference that we held, and one of the teams was talking about how they created this narrative game, which we called Detours. It's by Mismatched Games. It's absolutely fantastic, but it's about this road trip that two exes are taking across country with one another, and it's about a queer relationship. And I said to them, what does it mean to you? Because I've spent my entire career trying not to talk about being a woman in games in a way, being a female designer. I just want to talk about design, and what I bring as a designer and my skill. So why are you attributing this label so clearly? And they said, well, this is the first time we've ever been in an environment where we don't have to look over our shoulders and wonder if anybody's an ally. So we can talk about this relationship, this beautiful thing, freely, and this just sounds weird for me to say, but with normalcy, because it absolutely should be normal, right? And so I think, just to expand on that point, is we really need to see the hiring practices and the people in leadership changed in order to be able to see the actual representation of people and characters change.
And just to quickly build on something that Tara said, and I'm sure you can speak to this more, having been in the industry for so long, a lot of it is also being forced out. I can only really speak to it from the TV and film side, where you can see productions like Brave and look at it and be like, oh my God, that's such an amazing story. They forced that female director out. They stole her story in some ways and still put it on screen. I'm sure there's similar stories in the games industry of women kind of climbing to the top and then kind of getting pushed out at the end. I just might not necessarily know them. but there's a lot of that happening as well. And so just to be careful that just because something is skinned a certain way, it does not mean that what happened behind the scenes was in any way equitable. And just to just be wary of that. Like if you're looking at a production team and they're touting like this amazing new diverse avatars, and then the complete studio photo, everyone's white, like that's not necessarily progress.
I will say,
Oh,
I'm
sorry. Go
No,
ahead.
I was gonna say, I will say, just in the position that I'm in, the other thing is to ask people. I will say that, if you are creating a character and to the points where you don't have potentially representation within the studio, we are seeing certain studios reaching out to us for sensitivity readings or other ways of making sure. And we don't, we bring in a diverse, for us, people with disabilities that may be represented and have them do those feedbacks. But we are seeing, game companies reach out to organizations like GamerX and asking for consultation work around making sure they're telling a rich story that isn't just a stereotypical story. So I will say I wanted to call that out because that's fairly new. And when I say a fairly new thing, I've got more than 3 data points of it happening in the last 5 months when I got nothing before. I actually think it might be a good thing coming out of the pandemic, which is we've learned to work remotely and we've learned to reach out of our bubbles because everything's out of our bubble now.
Absolutely. That is an excellent point. It's something Mark Reich and I actually did discuss a lot when we were talking about the Character Mosaic project and developing it. It's very much about understanding that you cannot Google authenticity. And I think for a really long time, when people think about bringing, diverse characters into a game, it turns into that process of just take a basic white character, paint him brown and call it a day, versus actually honestly thinking what your positive representation is. Because so many times we might think that we're I don't know, complimenting someone by saying, hey, this is look, we put a diverse character in and they're the protagonist and yay. But the way we actually encode them or the way we actually make them could actually be insulting. It makes me think of my early days in animation. I started in Pakistan, and one of my coworkers gave me a compliment and told me, hey, you're so competent, you could be a man. And it's a great compliment, and I understood that, but at the same time it was sort of thanks, where you don't really know how to respond to it. And I think that's one of the dangers in how representation currently can fall into, is just that idea of just because it's there, it doesn't necessarily mean it's positive. It is helpful to do things with the sensitivity writers. And I know that that started to happen a lot more in film and animation as well. It's people will actually reach out to authorities in the field and actually discuss what is and isn't correct. But again, we don't have just a few. There's no way to be an authority for an entire culture, right? So I think it then just comes back down to that thing of it's important to start saturating the market as well, to bring in more stories from more places and more people, and not just having a few gatekeepers who are well, I am this person and this is what I'm going to do,
Yeah, one thing I tell my students all the time is this your story to tell?
Yeah.
Because just because you can doesn't mean you should. And even if you are part of that community, if you want to make a game about mental illness and you want to talk about depression and you yourself have depression, that's fine, but you still need to check in with the broader depressive community. And I mean, unless you're making a small indie game that's just for you and that's expressive and therapeutic, okay, I can't tell you how to process your own stuff. You do you. But if it's something that you're wanting to release to a larger audience, even if you identify as a member of who you're representing, you still need to get different perspectives, because depression, there's 174,000 different combinations of depression or something. It's something ridiculous like that. And then everybody's going to be different. And then you add in cultural differences or racial differences or class differences, access to mental health care differences, and it's all going to be radically, radically different. And so, yeah, just always, check yourself. And even if you think, have somebody else take a look too, somebody who's going to be very honest with you and hopefully doesn't look like you or hasn't experienced the same world that you have for whatever reason that is.
Yeah, we have a little saying, which is, I am disabled, not the disabled.
Yes. Yep. I have a mental illness. I am not the poster child of said mental illness. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting. This is just the other day I attended a talk of the Arab American Foundation in Michigan, and they were talking about just how difficult it is to be the representative of like a broader just culture that is so diverse just within itself. There are 22 countries that count as being Arab, and they were talking about it, and I was like, that's so true. It's so hard to be lumped in with such a big whole, because there is no way to differentiate, at least right now. And I think that's kind of like, this is more of a global issue, not necessarily just gaming, but that tendency to like flatten what we don't know into like one single identity or one single entity is definitely an area that will hopefully be pushed.
And we had a follow-up question here, which our questioner answered as well, to say, are they paying you when they consult you? I hope yes.
Yes.
So
yes.
That's good. That's another important part about valuing people's time and their input. We can't expect people to just show up and do things for free.
We agree.
Well, thank you all. We'll move on to sort of our final question of today, focusing a little bit more on the player side of things. We've been talking a lot about the game development and development community side, but from the player side, some gamers play for fun and others play as a career or for video or streaming content. Do you think that this creates a divide within the gamer community between perceived serious and casual players? An additional concern is the lack of diversity among professionals or career gamers and overt hostility towards some players from less represented communities. If this is the case, do you think this impacts larger efforts towards diversity and inclusion in game design and development, as well as gameplay?
I can speak to some of the work that I was doing at ESPN. So while I was over there, I did a lot of reporting on esports, which was a nascent community. And we had a piece that went viral that was basically, why don't more Black kids go pro? And in it, I profiled various players and different people coming from everything from essentially like structural support. So African-American players, again, Betsy's research was amazing in that, tend to favor consoles and consoles. So you see a lot of representation in places like NBA 2K, which is co-sponsored by the NBA, versus something like, Dota or League, even in places like Hearthstone, where there are African-American players that are kind of competing at the highest levels. They were actually bullied out. There was one player, Terrence M., who was like kind of one of the top ranked Hearthstone players, and he was called racial slurs throughout the entire match, in addition to some of the moderators actually participating in that. And so it was a really, really hostile environment for him. I just put that in as kind of like looking at the whole landscape of why you see certain people kind of being able to turn games into a career and go pro. I feel like the casual versus serious player divide is less around that, and particularly like that casual label is normally applied to like female players, and particularly games that people just don't want to take seriously, honestly. And this idea that women are not serious players, even if they're putting in 40, 50 hours a week on game titles that they love, or even they're spending $500 a month, they're never going to be serious because that's not a hardcore thing. Also, in just reading women as, oh, like what do you actually play? Are you really a gamer? All of those types of things. So I would see those as kind of slightly different questions in some ways. And that I don't feel like that shift toward more of a creator community in the player base and the fan base is necessarily a bad thing. What I do see is that inequity is really repeating. So esports was so new at the time we were writing about it. I think that piece is now like 3 years old. It was so new. and people are making tons and tons of money, but we're seeing the same patterns playing out over and over and over again. We're like, oh, we're setting up the exact same system that is happening in games and happened other places. And, you know, unlike sports, unlike TV, there wasn't a legacy that this was coming from. Like, this is starting now, it's happening now, and we're still seeing it. It's just one of those things that, again, if you're not paying attention at the founding, stuff becomes entrenched before you know it.
And I can speak to the streaming side of it. I actually just finished a research paper on streamer mental health during COVID, so that's fun. But yeah, right now there is a large Twitter fight going on with streamers about whether you have to be good at the game you stream. And if you're not, are you really a streamer? And if you're partnered and you're not good at games, but you stream games, obviously there were behind the scenes shenanigans where Twitch treated you differently because you were a woman, because they don't do that for men. And I mean, this is happening, like, if I open my feed right now, it would be right there. So yeah, it's definitely not theoretical. It's very happening right now. And to the idea of the differentiation between, you know, serious games, hardcore games, and the casual gamer, the Venn diagram of like majority male players and majority female players, they're almost identical. And so it feels like just another way of devaluing the work that women, or rather non-male players, people of color, like anybody who's not your typical gamer dude, it's a way of devaluing their work and their skill. And, you know, some of my favorite streamers are terrible at games, and that's fine because you're not there for that. That's just one reason people tune into streams. You could be going for the community. You could be going because the streamer's engaging and funny. You could go because you like seeing the shenanigans. But yeah, just this idea of like, when we have to gatekeep, let's put up those same ones. Oh, well, you're not good enough. Oh, you are good enough. Well, the game you like, you're good at doesn't count. And so it's just ways of keeping that structure, like Latoya was saying.
Agreed. And also, I mean, I actually think it's interesting as well that we're like talking about the hierarchy and lack of diversity, because and I may be wrong about this, but I thought the professional esports stuff started in like Korea. I feel like it started like on the other side of the world. And it's interesting that like something that came up, you know, and is actually very popular in Asia, like across Asia, is now suddenly being like, hey, this is something that's over here, and now we're making divisions, and we're talking about the varieties of streaming and stuff. For me personally, the streaming, I think I don't think it necessarily should be about the skill. Of course, you know, everyone makes their divisions and their ideas. I think it is more about the performance, you know, in the same way, like Twitch has this like special thing. They created a world where gamers could finally like watch each other play, and essentially like be able to sit next to each other without sitting next to each other, you know, and that's a very special experience. But the kids that become, and I shouldn't call them kids, the players who become very, very, you know, very, very popular in their medium, in their channels, is because they have like a very unique skill. They have the ability to perform while they play in such a way that it just changes the perception of the game itself. And this, just from my conversations with my friends in gaming, I will say, like, I don't think that it's been happening consciously, you know. I think it's something that, like, because it developed organically by itself, it is sort of turning into something which now like game developers are starting to look at and be like, oh my God, you know, they just turn like playing into an art. Like, how do we help them make it even more artistic? How do we make this even more exciting? Which then, of course, becomes reflected because of the attitude of the whole gamer community in general. I will say, though, I think the general prevailing concept of like your average gamer being a 13-year-old boy who's never, you know, had a friend in his life, probably the worst thing that we are still doing, that is still happening in gaming. There definitely needs to be a lot more research and a lot more, like, you know, distribution of that research in gaming companies and just people overall.
Yeah, to quickly address Atiya's point in terms of the geographic and landlocked boundaries, absolutely. So South Korea was the biggest market where esports really like spawned from. And that one, there's more gender issues. So my colleague, Christina J. Kelly and Rachel Gu both wrote tons about it. So did Mina Kimes, who was at ESPN. She did the big profile on Faker. All of them also looked at that. There, it was more gender, and particularly, like, I think the first female pro player that was signed to one of the big major teams.
Yeah. And
embarrassed.
there's a lot of like resistance, right?
Yeah, there was so much resistance. She was always being targeted and she didn't even want to talk about it. Like people would be like, what is it? She's like, don't even say I'm a woman, just stop, right? Because it was so stressful for her to do so. And then if you look at kind of like who are the top paid players, you're starting to see more folks from Brazil, you're seeing folks from Barcelona. So it's starting to diversify in a very different way. The United States lags a little bit in the global esports scene. So it's not quite the same divisions, but you're starting to see as players are getting traded, as players are starting to move from the US to Korea to break their careers, which is a really interesting migration. When you're starting to see that, you're starting again, like these inequities keep going. And like esports, it's weird because esports started this very organic thing. And so there's to this point where they're like, oh, you can't prove like what's going to be spectatable, what's going to be good. But now people have thrown billions of dollars into this. So it's like some of these things are definitely propped up by different other types of industries and by speculative investors, to be quite frank, by people who think they can really cash in on what this is going to be. And they're favoring a specific type of person yet again. So again, why is Ninja one of the highest paid players? And Ninja, particularly he of the, what do we call that one? The Mike Pence rule, that I don't play with other women because I don't want to be disrespectful to my wife. I don't stream with other female streamers because I don't want to be disrespectful. The dynamics that start appearing when you're looking at those kind of things, it's just really fascinating. I mean, esports is still super, super new and there's not tons of research and work on it, but I'm looking forward to seeing how it's evolving over the next few years.
I think for men, I think a good practice would be to actually watch women either streaming or, that are, put up videos of their experiences in games. So if every time, a woman gets on and starts playing a game, they're surrounded by other men who are just harassing them like, oh, your voice sounds funny, or, any kind of belittlement. By watching those from their eyes, you can really get a sense. Well, I mean, I say really get a sense, but you obviously really can't get a sense. But you get at least an idea of how that harassment can affect you, especially if you have a woman who's like, I want to be I want to be that esports, I want to be Ninja, right? But if every time she's getting into that game, she can't get that full experience of just being in the game and just playing and doing their best, that's going to be detrimental to help raising that level.
I think that Twitch has a responsibility, if you're talking about streaming as well, which is to give tools to creators to kind of flag these types of behaviors and have global ramifications for it. Some of the streamers I know with disabilities, we're asking these diverse streamers to grow incredibly thick skins because of the hate that comes their way. And I think that if, these platforms gave creators the ability to kind of flag really poor behavior so that it can be removed from, not just ban me from my channel, which I think is something, but, if you're starting to see a particular user who is clearly this pattern of behavior, creating these global reputation score type things so that your behavior has real meaning and you're removed from the platform so that, you can't keep doing that. I think that that's a missing piece of this.
Gosh, that would be nice.
Exactly.
I used to play Halo 3, Halo back in the day. I used to play Halo 3 competitively. And so I would play with other ladies and we had a competitive all-female team. And we used to joke with one another, like, how many death threats did you get today? How many inappropriate pictures did you get today? And it's just this thing where, like, if you want to be a woman, especially in like a shooter space, you just got to deal with it. And if you can't, then you're just not in that space anymore, which is so incredibly unfair and so messed up in so many ways. And especially because, Twitch now, it does have reporting tools. Twitch actually, compared to 10 to 5 years ago, has a lot more robust moderation tools. Unfortunately, they don't really do anything with it. They just released their transparency report last month. And of the reports of specifically gender or race-based harassment, they acted on less than 6%. I believe it was actually 3%. Like, it's easier to get into Stanford than it is for Twitch to take your complaints of harassment seriously. And I mean, let's not even call it harassment, it's abuse. And, you know, we're not talking about, hey, woman, go get me a sandwich, which again, like, still harassment, still annoying. But, you know, these are not small things. These are very provable things that we have video on demand of, we have chat logs of, and the platforms still don't do anything. And that goes back to our original conversation of who's at the top, who is making these decisions, who is deciding that, you know, me saying, hey, this guy continues to harass me, he's following me on different platforms, I literally have a stalker and have to lock things down. Can you do something? And they're like, no, it doesn't quite violate our TOS. I'm like, well, then what is the point of your TOS? Because I certainly don't feel safe here. So yeah, sorry, that's my, I'm gonna get off that soapbox. I could go on for a while, but I'm gonna rein it in.
Yeah. And Atia, did you have, Latoya,
sorry.
Really amazing women in esports too. So TL Taylor and Morgan Romain of Any Key. Morgan Romain was Roulette back at the Frag Dolls, were the first like female-funded professional teams, and they've spent at this point 10 years trying to amass a body of work and to work with these companies to make a more equitable playing field. So I didn't want to let their work be unacknowledged.
Yeah, I was on the PMS Clan competitive team, so yes, they do amazing work. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think going back a little bit to Mark's point as well, is like, it might really make a difference if all of these people who are flagged as being harassers are forced to like wear the cloak of a female identity or a diverse identity for a certain amount of time, and have that and actually just receive their own just desserts in that sense. That would be so much fun as a punishment. And I mean, I would pay to watch that.
That is a really interesting idea. And I think it's kind of an apt place to stop about trying to understand and experience other people's experiences in gaming as well, is one way that we can all just create a better community overall of gameplay, design, education, all of it. So we are nearing the end of our time today. I'm going to let my colleague come in here to just give us a little bit of information about our survey and next steps.
Hi everyone, I'm Tiffany Davis, and I would like to thank you all for joining us today for the panel. On behalf of the Diversity and Gaming team, we would like to give a special thank you to our panelists, Tara Mustafa, Mark Reich, Mark Barley, Latoya Peterson, and Atia Newman, and Kelly Dunlop. It was a pleasure to have you all here today and to discuss diversifying gameplay and the creation of games. Thank you all for joining us to hear such amazing panelists talk. And now that we have you thinking about gaming and changing your mindset of how you view games, we'd love to have your input on how we can continue the conversation and impact change. We have created a survey that includes diverse, inclusive, and accessible games and controllers that are being considered for the Atkins Library's Diversity and Gaming Collection in Area 49. If you have played or used any of these items on this page, we'd love your feedback. If you are a student, staff, or faculty member at UNC Charlotte, you can check out games and controllers at the tech desk on the second floor of the library and play them at home or on consoles or on the PC in our gaming lab. Once you've played the games or used the controllers, please follow the link or QR code on the screen. Or if you are unable to see those links on the screen, please visit us at bit.ly/diversity in gaming. And this will take you to our survey where you can share your thoughts about what we should put into our collection or suggest additional items that we should offer as part of this collection. The survey will only take you about a couple of minutes to complete, and you can fill this survey out multiple times until May 13th. And if you have played any of these games, more than one game, or used more than one controller on the list, you can definitely go back and do multiple fill out the survey multiple times. And finally, thank you all for attending and participating today. And we hope to see you soon. Thank you.